My name is Frances Whitmore. I am 67 years old. And on a Saturday afternoon in April, at my granddaughter's 5th birthday party in my own home, a woman I had never seen sat in my chair at the head of my table. I want to tell you about the chair first. Not because it is a chair, it is wood and cushion and entirely replaceable, but because of what it represented in that room on that day. I had lived in that house for 31 years. I had raised my children at that table. I had sat in that chair at the head of it for every holiday meal, every birthday, every Sunday dinner that the family had gathered for across 3 decades. When my husband, Gerald, was alive, he sat at the other end. When Gerald died 11 years ago, the other end became the chair we placed the flowers on at Christmas, and I moved through the remaining space alone. But my chair remained mine. It is the kind of thing that is understood without being stated in a family that has been together long enough. The specific geography of a home that has held a life, where the grandmother sits, where the grandchildren are placed, the arrangement that has its own logic and its own history. The woman was perhaps 40 years old, well-dressed. She had the settled quality of someone who has arrived at a place they consider theirs and has arranged themselves accordingly. She was talking to my granddaughter, Lily, who was 5 and delighted by the attention and too young to understand the geography of the chair. I looked at my son, Nathan. Nathan was 42 years old. He had been divorced from Lily's mother, Carolyn, for 2 years. The divorce had been Carolyn's decision, and it had been, from what I understood, necessary. The marriage had not been working for some time before it ended, and both of them had been, since the ending, more at peace than they had been inside it. I had maintained my relationship with Carolyn as Lily's mother. I had managed the transition with the specific care that grandmothers learn to manage such transitions. Nathan had not, in the 2 years since the divorce, mentioned anyone specific. He looked at me from across the room. He did not move, did not apologize. He crossed to the woman at the head of my table, and he placed his hand on her shoulder. And he said her name. The way he said it, with the specific ease of a man speaking the name of someone who has become essential, whose name he says 40 times a day, who is woven into the texture of his ordinary life in a way that has not been announced, told me everything before the sentence was finished. I waited until there was a quiet moment, until the cake had been brought out and the candles blown and Lily had opened 3 presents and the room had settled into the comfortable scatter of a children's birthday party in its later stage. Then I asked Nathan who she was. His answer made my whole body go cold. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Nathan told me her name was Christine. He said they had been together for 14 months. 14 months. A little more than a year. He had been seeing this woman for 14 months and had not mentioned her name to me once. I stood in my kitchen doorway. Nathan had followed me there, having understood that I needed to be somewhere with less audience, and I did the arithmetic in my head. 14 months from April was February of the previous year. 8 months after his divorce was finalized. I said, 14 months. He said, yes. I said, and Lily? Does Lily know her? He said, yes. They've met several times. I felt the cold that I mentioned, not from Christine's existence, not from Nathan having moved forward with his life, not from any of the things that the cold might seem to be about on the surface. From something more specific. My granddaughter had been spending time with a woman I had not known existed. There had been a significant person in my son's life and in Lily's life for 14 months, and my son had chosen, for 14 months, not to tell me. I said, why didn't you tell me? He looked at me. He had his father's eyes, Gerald's steady dark eyes that I had loved for 40 years and that I saw every time I looked at Nathan. He said, I wasn't sure how you'd react. I said, 14 months is a long time to be uncertain. He said, I know. I'm sorry. I want to tell you what my reaction actually was before I tell you what came after, because the story requires honesty at every point. My immediate reaction, the cold, the breath that did not quite arrive properly, the specific stillness of a body absorbing something it was not prepared for, was not about Christine. I understood this within the first few minutes of standing in my kitchen. Christine was a woman my son loved. She had been kind to my granddaughter. She had sat in my chair not from disrespect, but from the ordinary comfort of someone who had, over 14 months, presumably sat in many chairs in many homes and had not understood the specific weight of this particular one in this particular house. My reaction was about Nathan, about the 14 months of silence, about being the grandmother who had not known, who had been the last to know, who had learned by seeing a stranger in her chair at her granddaughter's birthday party. That was what made my body cold. Not who the woman was. How I had found out. I went back into the living room. I walked to the head of the table, to my chair, where Christine was now standing, having gotten up to help Lily with something. I introduced myself. I said, "I'm Frances, Nathan's mother. I'm sorry I haven't had the chance to meet you before now." Christine looked at me with an expression that was neither guilty nor defensive. She was a direct person. I understood this in the first exchange. She said, "I know. I'm sorry about that. I should have pushed harder for it to happen sooner." I looked at her. She said, "For what it's worth, I asked Nathan to introduce us months ago. He kept finding reasons to delay." I looked at Nathan, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the floor. Christine said, "I'll let you two talk." She went to find Lily. Nathan and I talked for 20 minutes in the kitchen while the party continued in the living room. Not a dramatic conversation, the specific, careful, necessary conversation of a mother and adult son navigating something that has gone wrong and needs to be addressed without the addressing causing more damage than the original thing. He had been afraid, he said again. Not of me, exactly, of my judgment, of the comparison I might make to Carolyn, of the possibility that I might not approve, of the specific way that mother's opinions, when they arrive, rearrange a son's relationship to his own choices. I said, "Nathan, you are 42 years old." He said, "I know." I said, "You don't need my approval to live your life." He said, "I know." I said, "But I needed the chance to know her. I needed to meet her before she sat at my table at Lily's birthday. That was not fair to any of us, including her." He said, "I know. I'm sorry. I really am." I want to tell you about Christine, because she is the part of the story that the surprise at the head of my table obscured. Over the months that followed that Saturday in April, I came to know her. Not quickly. I am not a person who trusts quickly, and Christine, to her credit, was not a person who pushed for trust she had not earned. She was patient in the way of someone who understands that certain relationships require time, and that the time is worth spending. She was a nurse practitioner. She had worked in pediatric care for 15 years. She had a specific, practiced warmth with children that Lily responded to with the immediacy of a child who recognizes someone who genuinely likes her. She was funny in the dry, understated way that I find most trustworthy. She made Nathan laugh, the particular laugh of someone who has been given permission to be fully themselves. She asked me about Gerald. Not out of social obligation. She was genuinely curious about who he had been and what our life had looked like. I told her about him, about the 31 years in the house and the table and the chair at the other end. She listened with a quality of listening that is a professional skill and also, in her case, a personal one. At Christmas, she asked, carefully, directly, whether she should sit elsewhere. I looked at her across the table. I said, "No, you can sit there." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Frances." That was all. No drama. No grand gesture. Just the small and real accommodation of one life, making room for another. Nathan called me in February to tell me he and Christine were engaged. I said, "Good." He said, "Good." I said, "She asked me months ago if I had concerns. I told her I didn't." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When?" I said, "November. We had coffee." He said, "You had coffee with Christine in November and didn't tell me?" I said, "You kept a relationship from me for 14 months. I kept a coffee from you for 3. He laughed. The particular laugh I described, the one she gives him, arrived through the phone, and it was the right sound. I told him I was happy for them. I meant it. The chair at the head of my table is still mine. Christine has not sat in it since that first Saturday. Not because anyone has said anything, because she is perceptive and because she understood, without being told, that there are things in a home that carry weight and that the weight deserves respect. She sits to my left now. Nathan to my right. Lily across from me. The table arranged the way it arranges itself, when the right people are in the right places. I wish Nathan had told me sooner. I wish I had not learned about Christine by finding her in my chair at Lily's birthday. I wish I had been introduced before 14 months of his life had passed without me in them. But I also know, in the way that time and honesty eventually produce knowledge, why he waited. He was afraid of the judgment he had grown up receiving from the person at the head of the table. He was managing, in the way that adult children manage it, the specific weight of a parent's opinion on the life they are trying to build. I could not protect him from the fear I had apparently produced in him, without meaning to. But I could be, when the introduction finally happened, the person he had been afraid I would not be. I was that person. It was late, but it was not too late. That is the thing about family. The table keeps getting set. People keep sitting down. And if you are lucky, if you pay attention and you show up and you make room, the right people find the right chairs. Eventually. In their own time. At their own pace. Whether or not you were the last to know.